All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm not sure if everybody is back, but thank you for coming. If this is your first time joining us, we're happy to have you. If you're returning, thank you for coming back. We try and do these most weeks, so this is a lot of fun. Today, we are really, really grateful and super lucky to have Tanya Fritz with us from Black Hills Works in South Dakota. And Tanya's got an amazing history, and she's a resiliency expert and a trauma-informed expert. So she's going to share some of her wonderful, wonderful knowledge with us today. But before we get started, just as a matter of a couple of things here, we've got a lot of people in this session, so I'm going to mute everybody right now. And Tanya, you'll have to unmute yourself, just so you know. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody just so that it's easier for all of us to hear Tanya. And then if you go up to the top right and you hit speaker view, you'll have Tanya nice and big on your screen when she starts talking. Okay, and we actually have a couple more people joining us. So I think we're good, Tanya. I am going to turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Gina. Wow, what a wonderful crew. And I've seen a few people have their states listed. So it looks like we got folks from California and Alaska and South Dakota. I'm sure there's lots of other states. I just haven't seen all the names. So welcome, everyone. And Gina said I was some kind of, expert in trauma and resilience. And I think we all are, aren't we? I mean, we all, through being human, we have experienced trauma. And we have been very resilient. Otherwise, you wouldn't all be here right now. So clearly, we're all in this together. Trauma, one of the reasons that I got really interested in it was it really served as an umbrella or a bridge to understand so many things, because it isn't about them and me, it's about us. We've all experienced trauma. We all have to be resilient. So this is a big group. I'd love for us to just kind of connect. I know that this is a different format for virtual trainings. I think pre-COVID, most of us were used to, oh, there's a webinar, there's a virtual training. Let me put it on in the background, and then I'm going to get my email done and get my work done. And the first time that I logged into one of Gina's trainings, I went, uh-oh, I can't do this while I'm driving in my car. And that's, I think, going to be kind of the new normal. We're going to use these virtual trainings as a way that we can really interact and communicate and connect with one another. So in order to do that, let's start by being all here in this moment. That's one of the practices of resiliency, is just being mindful and being fully aware of where you're at. So I'm going to ask all of you just to join me in a short little breathing activity so that we can kind of create that connection and that calmness and that centeredness. Going to do a pretty basic inhale and exhale. I will be extending your exhales through the process. And the reason I'm going to do that is your exhales are these super powerful tool that you have. And when you extend it, you actually trigger that part of your body that is going to start lowering your blood pressure and lowering your heart rate. And you're going to find yourself getting calmer and calmer as you increase that exhale. So I've got a little symbol I do. This is my inhale. This is my exhale. So y'all can follow along with me. And we will inhale for the count of 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, inhale, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, 3, inhale, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, inhale, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Does everybody feel a little bit calmer now? I hope so.
Thank you.
I hope so. I'm curious. I can't see everybody's screen because now I'm giant, so I only see a few people. And so Gina, I'm going to have you help me out a little bit. But either virtually with your little button or with your hand, give me an idea. Raise your hand if you're pretty familiar with trauma. You've learned about either how trauma impacts the brain or epigenetics. All right, so everybody I'm seeing right now has got a pretty good baseline of what.
Yep.
Has got a pretty good baseline of trauma understanding.
Lots of people. Yep.
Yep, okay, so that sounds good. Well, why don't you go ahead in the chat box and just jump in there and write what you think trauma is. What is trauma? Keep, just quick little answers. What is trauma? Too much, too fast. Yes.
What else?
What else can be trauma?
Experiences
Something
that
bad
change
that's
you.
happened in your life, experiences that change you. I love that, Samantha. I often say people talk about bouncing back, and I say you don't bounce back from trauma, you bounce forward. It does change you. A death in your life could be trauma, any kind of damage, stressful events, traumatizing, assault upon our being, anything that impacts you significantly, anything you're not prepared for. Absolutely, you guys are nailing it. Trauma is absolutely anything that is beyond our ability to cope. And the thing about trauma is it's very individualized. So what is a trauma for me may not be a trauma for you. We don't have to compare traumas, whose trauma is worse. Trauma is just when I can't handle the coping skills that I have, the skills I have are not enough to match the experience that I'm going through. So when we talk about trauma, I like to talk about a few different things. One of those, and we're just going to kind of buzz through some of those today, is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And the reason I think that is important is it is the largest study that we've ever done on childhood trauma, where 2 physicians looked at 10 different kinds of trauma that you can experience as a child. And they were able, through studying over almost 17,000 individuals, they were able to determine that what happened to you before you hit the age of 18, and those were things like physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect, living in a home with somebody who had a mental disorder, having a parent incarcerated. Those kinds of experiences, what they found is that they changed you for your life. Individuals who have those experiences and they experience the trauma and they don't treat it, they have lower life expectancies, higher rates of cancer, heart disease, pretty much any social issue from homelessness, suicide, all of those issues are significantly tied to what happens to us as a kid. And the reason I love this study is not because it says, oh gosh, something bad happened to me as a kid, and so now, my life is going to be miserable and hard. But rather, what it says is those things really matter, and so I can't ignore them. I need to treat them and address them and use them as stools to lift myself up even higher. Those 10 things don't even begin to capture all the traumas that we can experience. Even now as a child, it doesn't capture any of the things around racism and internet bullying and all kinds of other things. But what it does is it lays the foundation that says there is scientific research that supports that things that happen to us as a kid impact our physical, emotional, and behavioral health for our entire life. So the other thing that is important, and I know, Gina, you do a lot of training around the neuroscience. That's the other piece of trauma I think people can dig into. And I'm going to just mention these things today, and you can bookmark them. And if you want to learn more about them, you want to go to trainings, anything I say today is usually a 40-hour training in itself. So we're just going to drop some things, and then you know what to look into if you're interested. So the neuroscience, when you want to understand trauma, it's important to understand that trauma impacts the brain, that trauma impacts our body and our cells, and it lives in our body. Lots of studies that talk about how our prefrontal cortex, this thinking part of our brain, it actually begins to shrink and doesn't get as much activity. You can do an MRI and see where things light up. This part of the brain, when we experience a lot of trauma, isn't getting a lot of use, so it begins to shrink. Our amygdala, which is our fear response, our fight and flight response, that tends to grow when we experience a lot of trauma. So the changes that are happening to us, some might say they're all in our head. Well, they really are. They're all in our brain. They're in our DNA now. They're in our bodies. And when we understand that, we change the way we interact with individuals. But most importantly, we recognize our own trauma and how we're responding in a moment, and when what we can do to make sure that we're using that prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of our brain, and not always letting our amygdala drive the car for us. And the last piece that I like to talk about in regards to trauma is epigenetics. And so what epigenetics is telling me is not only is my trauma going to change my brain today, but it actually can be passed down in my DNA. So my children, my grandchildren will experience these changes. There's a famous study in regards to rats that they did with cherry blossoms. And they had this group of rats. I'm going to give you the really kind of silly version of it, really condensed, but they had a group of rats, right? And they would give them the smell of cherry blossoms in their cage, but at the same time, they would electrify the cage. So you can imagine what would happen when that electrical current hit the cage. Those rats were scurrying, their pupils were dilating, their hearts were palpitating, they were absolutely terrified. Well, through conditioning, kind of that Pavlovian process, they began removing that shock and only putting in the cherry blossom smell. And what they found is those rats began to react just to the smell of the cherry blossoms, right? So the same thing would happen. Give them a whiff of cherry blossoms and their whole body went into a state of panic. That isn't earth-shattering news. We knew that. What was earth-shattering is that when these rats were bred and they had pups, they never had interaction with the parent rats. They were put in their own cage. And then when they were about, I think they were around age 1 maybe, they did the whole infiltration of cherry blossom smell. And these rats freaked out. There is no biological reason for rats to be afraid of cherry blossoms. They aren't naturally, but that was passed down through their DNA. The cool thing about this in regards to resilience is that if they never paired the smell of the cherry blossom with the shock, then the offspring of this group lost that fear. So you could give them cherry blossoms and it didn't carry on. So that talks about how powerful it is if we are able to work with our current generation, the changes that we can make for the future. All right, Gina, anything hopping up in the text that I should be aware of?
Nope, I was just writing down some of the things that you said so people could have it. I will save the text. I always send stuff in the follow-up emails, so I'm just jotting down your stuff. But that's fascinating. I remember listening, I think it was Dr. Dan Siegel out of UCLA talk about epigenetics and some people that they looked at just to see if, that had lived through various events and kind of, if their children had the same responses. It's just interesting stuff. There's not been enough studies on humans, but very, very interesting, definitely.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of research. Probably the majority of the research for epigenetics around humans is through concentration camps and that trauma and how it was passed on. Quite a bit also around African American and, in my area, Native American historical trauma is looked at a lot, and we talk about that a lot. So definitely is impacting, and it's just weird. It's interesting to think that, as a female, little biology here, but as a female, I was born with all of the reproductive eggs that I would ever have. So those reproductive eggs actually existed when I was in my mother's womb. And so those eggs were actually being impacted by her life. So when I look at my daughter now, half of her DNA was significantly impacted by what was happening to my mom when she was, 24 years of age. And it's really powerful because it's easy for us sometimes to think, oh, that was a long time ago. But when we start looking at those generational impacts, it wasn't. But again, that could be a whole nother training. We don't need to get too far off on that. And I'm just giving you kind of the abridged piece.
Yeah, a couple of people did put in the chat things like massage therapy or cranial sacral therapy is great for anxiety, and then EFT can be helpful too. So just a couple of suggestions.
Yes, yeah, there is a lot of really great training modalities out there now that recognize that our traumatic experiences are stored in our body, and so those somatic ways of releasing some of that trauma through movement is really powerful. So why do we talk about this when we're talking about work? We're not in a therapy session. We're not, why does trauma matter at work? Anybody want to drop an idea of why it matters in work? Yeah, let's get insurance to pay for this stuff. Well, we got to do the studies, Nicole. Let's keep doing them.
Yeah.
So it impacts our functioning at work. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, guys? Just type it right in the chat. Why does it impact us at work?
Impacts how we do our jobs.
For sure. How we treat others.
How we treat others, how we perceive situations and respond.
Yep.
So those are all fabulous reasons, and that's exactly why we talk about it. I let off here saying that trauma is not about us and them. It's about all of us. It's the we. We've all experienced some form of trauma in our life. It's pretty unique to get through the human experience without having some level of trauma. And it's extremely predictive. Like I said, through that ACEs study, they were able to prove, and we've done the neuroscience work to show that when we're in a state of arousal, we're most likely going to react this way. If we don't treat our traumas, we're more likely to experience X, Y, and Z. So we talk about it because they're common, they're predictive, they're powerful. We are all collectively experiencing trauma right now. It's been easy to say that trauma is about us, but right now, I'm watching some of my friends and coworkers they've had trauma in their life, but they've been pretty sheltered. And so this experience for them has been earth-shattering. So we are all collectively going through this, and it's going to change the way that we interact and the way we do our work going forward. But most importantly, when we do not address our trauma unaddressed is trauma transferred. So if I've got junk going on, I am going to bring it to work, and I'm going to impact my coworkers. And so when I work with individuals, I do a lot of work with on the reservations with trauma-informed schools, and sometimes that's where the name of this came from. Is often they're like, "Oh, awesome, trauma-informed. Tell us what we need to do for our students. How do we make our workplace trauma-informed?" And I always say, well, we start with you. First, you do your own work. Trauma-informed is not a checklist of different things that you do for your clients and now you're trauma-informed. It's about really looking at your own biases, your own self, your own triggers, building your emotional intelligence, addressing traumas that have happened to you in the past so that you can always bring the best version of yourself to the table and treat people with the humanity that they deserve. Well, welcome back. Hopefully nobody got any bumps or bruises on their traveling through the breakout room universe. I just love these breakout rooms. Gina has done them a few times, and I really enjoy being able to, especially when you do one like this where you're on a call with people from all over the country. There's something there's this, maybe it's just me, but there's this level of just comfort. So I end up in this breakout room and I just find myself chit-chatting about everything that's going on and really comfortable about it. So it's a neat way to reach out to others and explore what's going on around our country. So thanks for participating in that. Just to kind of wrap up that exercise, now that we're all back in the room, if anybody wants to share maybe one of their, there's two things. So if you want to share maybe one of your telltale signs, and I always say, if this was hard for you and you don't know what your telltale signs are, go home and ask your children or your partner or your roommate. They know what your telltale signs are. They'll let you know. But hopefully everybody kind of figured them out. So if you guys want to just raise your hand, and then Gina can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, and just let me know one of your. Yeah,
I can't see everybody.
Signs.
Yeah, you just can't see everybody on the same screen. So if you guys go to participants, you can raise your virtual little blue hand and I'll be able to see that. That is the best thing. Or if you want to type something in the chat and then we can read it out for you. But we love to hear your voices, so you're not just listening to us the whole time. I can scroll through quickly if you want to try and physically raise your hand, but it's a little bit, there's a lot of people on this call.
Yeah, so if you want to share one of your signs, but also if you want to share, why does it matter? Why do we need to know what our signs are? So if you don't want to share your sign, maybe you just want to tell me why you think it's important for us to be aware of what they are.
So what's somebody's stressor sign? Oop, was that Priscilla? Did you just write that it helps you oh, it's important because it helps you recognize your triggers and that you shut down.
Yep.
Cool, thank you for that.
Oh, Bill, that's great. Yep, so we can practice self-care. It's a good good reminder for us that maybe things are getting
Mhm.
headaches and neck hurts. Yeah, so that's really interesting. There's research that says when our amygdala is on fire, we tend to raise our shoulders. And so I call this like the turtling. And pretty soon your neck and everything is super sore and tired. But how often during the day, if we just did a quick body scan, would be like, oh, yep, my jaw is clenched and my shoulders are up.
Yep.
Yeah, and Nicole is saying right now, teeth grinding is what she does.
Yep.
Mhm.
And not sleeping. I see that. Dawn wrote
Yeah.
that. Not sleeping well.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the
Oh,
sleep is, and sleep is a tough one because we need that. We need that rest and restore time.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a tough
Yep,
one.
and knowing them tells you that you can de-escalate before you get out of control. Lots of people not sleeping well on this call, Gina.
That's not good. We need our
No,
rest.
no.
We need our rest.
Yeah, being
Short-tempered.
short-tempered. Uh-huh. Yeah. More energy at the end of the day than the beginning of the day. Yep, we all have our little rhythms and our cycles. So absolutely. So all of these are just ways that we become more self-aware. So Gina, if you want to pull up, we have a chart around the 9 kind of key areas around personal responsibility. So people will talk about mental health. And unfortunately, sometimes when they say, you know, what can I do? What they're really looking for is who's
Oops.
the right therapist? What's the right modality? What should I do for my mental health?
That's not
And
it, right? That wasn't
yep,
it.
it was there and then it went away.
Was it is it the tree or is it the?
Nope, nope, you had it. It's the
I did.
9 squares, the personal responsibility.
Oh, okay. Why is mine's not
Oh,
showing
not
up?
that one. It should be the other one. There's a third. There's one more that says personal responsibility.
Let me. Yeah, I found it, but for some reason it's
Okay.
sharing the other one.
Well,
I
I'll
know
keep talking, and
you
if you
keep
can find it,
talking. I'll
that's
find
good.
it.
If not, I'll just walk them through it.
Nope, I got it.
Okay. But as a society, we usually are looking for the quick fix, and we don't want to do the work. And having strong mental health and having a sense of well-being requires us to do a lot of our own work. So you'll see these 9 categories, and the second one there, self-awareness. That is an activity we just did to build that self-awareness. So self-awareness is knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. It's knowing your triggers. It's knowing your signs of stress. It's knowing your biases. It can be any of those, you know, personality tests, leadership tests. It's just getting to know yourself better. Developing and monitoring a whole self-wellness. So this is going to be some of the things that you think about immediately, like walking and sleeping, but it's also your spiritual connection. It's your professional growth. So sometimes when we're stressed out, we think we need to start saying no, right? People will say, learn to say no when you're stressed. Sometimes we need to say yes when we're stressed, because we might be stressed because we're filling 20 hours of our day with things that don't matter to us. So we need to say yes to the right things and to the things that matter to us. So making sure that we're looking at all of those areas of our self-wellness. Seeking out social support at home and work. The most resilient people in the world know how to use their resources. They have connections, they ask for help. Absolutely critical. All the bubble baths in the world are not going to help you if you feel disconnected. We at our core, human beings, crave connection. It goes way back to the caveman days when, you know, I had to have my buddy Jen stay awake all night and watch the cave door so I could get some sleep, and then we would swap off. Like, we needed those people to come together. And although some folks might say it's not as life or death now, I'd still say it is just as important that we have those people in our life that support us, that cheerlead for us and call us out, point out when we need to be better caring for ourselves. That
Tanya,
profession, yes.
I was just going to say that, you know, so much work here in Maryland is being done at Johns Hopkins on this, you know, human resilience. I mean, they have a huge human resiliency project, and that always, you know, through all of their studies, and I was just reading something from Harvard, it is, you know, that social network that is the key factor in human resilience. So absolutely spot on there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That connection is critical.
Mm-hmm.
Professional development. So how do you continue to push yourself to grow? Do you have that growth mindset? Are you constantly learning? I promise you that the techniques and the skills that I was taught when I was 19 to work with individuals that had, emotional and behavioral challenges, those are not best practice anymore. Some of them are actually just not even allowed anymore. So how do we continue to push ourselves and grow, and be prepared for the change that's going to happen? Those who were able to adjust to this pandemic are the ones who were already learning how to do virtual. They were perceiving that at some point we're going to need to do things differently, and they were ready for that change. Emotional regulation. So I have a daughter, and I always say that if she decides to have a child, if I become a grandparent, I sure as heck hope that she learns ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, and emotional resilience when she goes to preschool or before that. I think that emotional regulation is probably the most critical skill that we can have. 99.9% of the issues that we have on a day-to-day basis are because somebody wasn't regulated in that moment. And when it comes to my daughter, often it's me that's not regulated. So just because I can talk about the stuff doesn't mean I'm not still learning it. The next block is about not getting in our own way. We are often our own worst enemies. We get in our heads, we overthink things, we fall into patterns. It's kind of like I said, I know that when I'm stressed out, I should do the yoga and the meditation and go for a walk. But what do? I convince myself that I deserve a day off. I deserve to do nothing but eat ice cream and watch Grey's Anatomy for 14 hours, even though I know it's not going to help me. And so at the end of the day, I feel probably worse than I did in the morning. But do I learn? No. In 3 months, I'm going to have a really bad day, and I'm going to go home and do the same thing again. I get in my own way sometimes. Reducing our trauma exposure. A lot of the folks on this call, you guys are helpers. And so this is what I know. This is what the research tells us, that trauma, especially in our childhood, very, very common, even more common for helpers. Very often we get into this field because we know what it's like to not have everything that we needed when we were a kid, or to have those relationships. So we get into this to help others. So very often we've already had high levels of trauma exposure. And then we go into this work and into this field, and we hear about others' traumas. We hear their stories and their experiences, and we start to take those on. We support people, and we watch them make choices that are theirs to make, yet we watch some of them not be the healthiest choices. We sometimes then read our books and watch our TV shows that have everything to do with trauma. I don't know what it is, but I worked in child abuse, and they all of the folks that I worked with would go home at night and watch, the SUV sexual crimes unit. And it's like, we just keep putting more and more of that in front of us. I like to leave people with a little skill. So here's one skill that you can take from this. And it comes out of the work of the TEND Academy that does a lot of work around trauma. And they talk about, venting. Often at work, somebody will come to you and they'll tell you all about their day and all of the traumas they've experienced. And, oh, you wouldn't believe, so I got on shift and then this happened and then he did this and this happened. And they just kind of emotionally vomit all over you, right? And they tell you everything bad that happened to them. TEND calls that sliming. You just got slimed. And so what we can do is we can use that terminology to make it kind of lighthearted and be like, whoa, don't slime me if somebody starts to do that. Because here's what they need. They need to be able to share their emotions and their experiences. So the way we can do this is, if I have a really bad day, then I would go to Gina and I would say, hey, Gina, can I talk about my day with you right now? So I get permission, because Gina might say, yes, I'd love to hear about it. Or she'd say, I'd love to, but I actually have a call right after this, so can we do it at 3 o'clock? I give Gina permission. Or it might just be that Gina is up to here with her own stuff and she can't take on anything more. She doesn't have that capacity right now. So the first thing before I kind of vent about my day is I get Gina's permission. And then when I do tell the story of my day, I focus on how I felt. I focus on my emotions. I think about the details that I'm giving, And I leave out the gory details. They don't need to know what it smelled like or felt like or tasted like or sounded like. They need to know just how I was feeling through that process. So that's, that's a great thing that you can do. You can start right now. The next time you see somebody you need to vent, ask for their permission and watch the details that you give. Or if somebody starts venting to you, go, whoa, I'm feeling slimed. Have you ever heard of sliming? And you can tell them what sliming is. Anything popping up in the chat that I should be aware of, Gina? You're muted.
I can't see the chat until I stop sharing. So
Okay.
are you good? Or do you want to keep this up?
Yep, we'll just go through that last one and then we'll close down and kind of check in. And then the last one is to build those personal resilience skills. So those are the things like having gratitude journals, doing mindfulness practice, watching our own stories. What stories are we telling ourselves in our head? All of those kind of skills can really help with our personal responsibility. So you can take this down if you want.
Okay.
That was a ton in a really short time. I often will do a multi-day training just around personal responsibility, but I wanted to put those key factors in front of you so you knew kind of what they were. And it's only the beginning. So since we did that really fast, let's do another, how are we doing on time? Let's do another breakout session. You can do about the same size groups. And this time, let's just reflect on that. And knowing what you know about those 9 areas in your group, can you share which of those 9 areas is the easiest for you to focus on in regards to taking care of your personal responsibility for your mental health, and which one is the hardest for you to do? So if you want to throw them into those breakout groups, the easiest thing for them to do out of those 9 and the hardest, and we can put those 9 in the chat so they can see them.
Okay, and about how long do they have?
Let's do about the same amount of time that we did last. If
About 5 minutes. Okay,
yeah.
So I'll give you guys, warnings like I did last time. So hopefully some of you saw those as they came in. Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms. Do you want to try and teleport with me? Does anybody want to
we
do
can
this?
do that.
Yeah. Let's see. Come on, let's see some
easiest.
hands moving. You guys haven't moved. There you go.
That's
Thanks, Dawn.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Crazy, Gina.
All right, so we're going. We're moving. All right, there you go. Awesome. Great. See you on the other side.
So this is my favorite time when I'm working with people. I always say every time I do a training, I learn more than I'm able to share. So this is where I start picking all your brains, and I'd love to know, again, you can throw it in the chat box, or you can raise your virtual hand, unmute yourself. But if you would start out by, I'm curious if anybody's willing to share one of the areas that's hardest for them. What's the one area you know you should be doing it, but it is the hardest thing to do?
I can answer that question.
Yeah, Nicole.
Well, I'd say adaptive functioning, cleaning, cooking, especially in this day and age of, COVID, organizing, even though I may be high level academically, when it comes to cooking, cleaning, balancing a checkbook, flossing teeth and all that, I'm, pretty, I'm not, from the expert perspective, I'm not, quote, high functioning.
That adulting piece,
as much as the system says, oh, you're too high functioning, yet if you look at inside of me, I look at my house right now, you would say otherwise.
Yeah.
Messy, disorganized. There's certain job tasks that, where having a job coach would be helpful.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people, I don't get any services because I have autism and I don't have intellectual disability. So I fall through the cracks.
Thanks for sharing
Plus
that.
I don't drive.
Nicole, is there a time that you were that you can think back that you were on top of it, that you had maybe your house a little bit more organized, or you had a meal plan?
Well, when I had services in Vermont. Vermont, you can get services if you have autism, deficit adaptive functioning, and you don't have intellectual disability. But down here, it's pretty much voc rehab and low intensity support services, which is $2,000 to reimburse for certain things like Uber, Lyft, Metro Access, college education, and what have you.
Right. So for Nicole,
editing papers, that's another task. Organizing.
Yeah, all of those adulting skills. We had hail, and so I got my roof fixed, and I felt like such an adult that I got through that process. And then the very like three weeks later, we got a massive hailstorm again. I have to do it all over again. I'm kind of tired of all of that kind of stuff. But you know, I think what Nicole demonstrates is that she knows an area that she's challenged in, and she knows what helps her in that area. And so it's just figuring out how do you get that connection? How do you make that happen when maybe the system where she lives isn't set up for that? So anybody else want to share something that's they know they should do for their self-care, but they're not very good at it? I know for me, I'm an overthinker, and I know all of the tools I should use when I start overthinking, but I'm not very good at remembering to use them when I'm in the middle of an overthinking moment.
Yeah, Ted wrote in there, art and music helps tremendously.
Yes.
Yeah. Meal prepping. That's a great one.
I love it, Elizabeth. You're a starter. The world needs starters.
Yeah, and look nowadays, how many young people, don't cook these days. Even those without disabilities, look at adulting, and it's like, we don't have it. That.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Dawn, yes, not watch Dateline right before bed. Oh, how many of us do something like that? We put just that scary stuff into our brain right before we try to close our eyes.
I know at least one other person who does. She told me, but I won't call you out.
Dawn, I promise there is more than one person that's doing that.
Yeah, avoiding the news, Ted says.
Yeah, right. It's that like conundrum that we're in. It's like, okay, so I know I shouldn't be on the Facebook, right? Because it's all over the place. It creates an emotional roller coaster. And yet I feel like I have to be on Facebook because how else am I going to know what's happening right now in my community? The 24-hour news cycle can be quite the challenge. Yeah. Lydia knows she should probably sleep more, finish what she starts. Yeah, those are all big challenges. And so it's helpful for you to think back, when was a time that it worked for you? Like when we were talking to Nicole, when was a time that you were organized and what was going on in your life that helped you do that? When you were sleeping better, what were you doing that was helping you to sleep better? And sometimes there's things that are out of your control, but often there's a few things that are in our control that we can change our environment to get back to that. So that chart was all about individual responsibility. And we build our individual resilience in order to tackle the societal and the organizational issues, right? It doesn't all fall on us. If you're a supervisor, if you've ever had a supervisor, and you think back to a time that you were stressed out and you go to your supervisor and you tell them this is just too much, I'm overwhelmed, I'm missing deadlines, I'm not sleeping, and your supervisor says, well, let's talk about your self-care. And they say, are you walking? Are you doing this? And then as you're leaving the office, they're like, oh, and don't forget, we're going to add that extra meeting in next Thursday. So if you could be at that too, that'd be great. That isn't trauma-informed care, and that isn't helping you. That's saying that your resilience is your job, and I'm not going to change anything in my organization or in your workload to support that. So I want to kind of switch over here now, Gina, if you want to pull up that other chart that you had, the organizational responsibility. So like I said, the individual responsibility is where we start because that's what we have the most power over. But we know that there's things happening in our workplaces, in our communities, in our society, in the legislative, political world. There are things that we want to tackle. So we take care of ourselves so we're as strong and powerful and ready to tackle that as possible. And then we move towards that organization. And when you're working in an organization that is resilient focused, they're going to start with a manageable workload. Bottom line, if you do not have a workload that you can, on most days, manage, if every single night after night, you put your head on that pillow and you're thinking, I didn't get my job done today. I worked with many social workers who would wake up at 2 in the morning and go, oh, did I make that call? Did I do that visit? Oh my gosh, I didn't get to that. And that is a gut-wrenching feeling. So I can tell you individually to get all the sleep you need, but if I don't give you a workload, that allows you to actually be able to get your job done. You're going to wake up in the middle of the night in a panic and not be able to sleep. Using supportive and flexible supervision and coaching. So when we're doing this, what we're talking about is we're talking about feedback that is just part of your day, so that you're giving feedback to your staff and you're getting feedback multiple times throughout the day. We're not waiting until it's that awkward, difficult conversation. We're talking about things throughout the day. When you are giving feedback, you're giving feedback with the belief that that person just doesn't have the skill yet. So if you're talking about, you know, your paperwork isn't being turned in on time yet, you are not able to you know, fully support this individual in this setting yet. And here's how we're going to help you get to that. So it's supervision and coaching that believes in the person and believes they can get better and focuses on what kind of skills they need to add to that person. And again, going back to managing that workload to make sure that their workload allows them to be successful in their job. Because that next one is that key component of staff feeling successful and effective. If that is at the core of resilience. You can have really, really hard days. You can work over your 8 hours. You can take calls outside of work for limited times, and you still feel good if you're making a difference. But if your days are filled with things that just don't feel effective, like you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall because you just can't make that change happen that needs to happen, or that elephant in the room that the organization just keeps ignoring, just, you know, nothing's going to change until that's talked about, but the people that can talk about it aren't talking about it. You know, at the end of the day, you're going to be exhausted addressing those system problems. So, you know, in our world, a lot of times we talk about, you know, person-centered and how do we do person-centered work? Then that's all great, but then let's look at the funding that's available to us. And if the funding that's available to us still supports congregate care, where there's multiple individuals in a home, and maybe there's a couple workers and a couple vehicles, and 4 different people in that home want to go 4 different places, then we can no longer do person-centered. We're organization or system-centered at that moment. That's a reality that we might live in, but when we build our individual skills and we have an organization that wraps around in this and supports us, we're willing to name it and to address it and to get in front of legislators and to rally our parents and our caregivers and to try to make those changes so that we don't just accept the system as it is. The organization should offer as much control over schedules as possible. When we get locked down to this is the morning shift, this is the afternoon shift, let's just take what's going on right now. Many of us are working from home right now. I personally will admit, I am getting more done in less time. And that's because my time is very flexible. If I know that the plumber is coming at 1 o'clock, I don't have to take the afternoon off to go meet the plumber. I just wake up a little earlier and get my work done, or I work in the evening after dinner for a little bit to make up for that time. So when you're able to offer that flexible schedules, you really bring out the best in your staff. So when I was supervising staff, I would often tell them, I'm not concerned about your minutes. You know, if they walked in the door 3 minutes late, I am not worried about your minutes. I'm worried about your years. I want you to be here for years and years and years. That doesn't mean, you know, some jobs, those minutes really are important. If you have to, you know, get here so somebody else can leave. But what can we do as a system to make that less critical? Can we have that overlap of staff be a little bit longer so somebody's not sitting at a stop sign going, oh my God, I'm going to be 2 minutes late, and they're freaking out before they even walk in the door? How do we offer as much control over that schedule as possible? Yep, Nicole's talking about that's the time that we're saving with our remote work. And then finally, varying staff duties. There are just jobs that are really, really challenging. I used to work with individuals that their primary responsibility every day was to interview victims of child sexual abuse. So they would spend hours of their day in a room with a small child asking the details about abuse. Now this will not surprise you, but that job title, which is forensic interviewer, as a whole in our country, forensic interviewers usually stay on the job for less than 2 years. And you can see why. That would be so hard to digest that every single day. But what we did is we started varying their jobs. So they were doing that part of the time. And then part of the time they were out in the community talking about how to keep kids safe, how to do prevention work, how to support families in the community. And what we found is that that was building their resilience, because one, they weren't doing the hardest part of their job for hours on end. And two, they were receiving a different level of, the community was listening to them and giving them encouragement and thanking them for the work they were doing, and it was building their resilience. If we think about the individuals that we support, some of the individuals that we support need very high levels of support. They might be primarily in home, and we're doing a lot of personal cares, not getting out in the community a lot. I don't know about across the country, but the homes that we have here, where that's the case, those sometimes are the hardest to staff. So is it possible to mix that up so that individuals that work in that home also maybe work with individuals that need less supports and do more of the community-based activities so that their days are a little bit more varied and they have more ability to do a variety of different things. All right, so I think we can pull that one down.
There you go.
All right. Now, those are a lot of the things that we need to do. But what trauma-informed care will tell us, it's not usually about what we do, it's about how we do it. So I worked with an organization once that said they were absolutely trauma-informed. And one of the policies that they talked about is their bereavement. So they allowed staff time off to go to funerals. And it was, tell me more about that. That sounds excellent. How does that work? Well, they can take the time off, and then upon their return, they just need to either bring us a copy of the obituary or the program, and they bring that to us, and we put that in their file, and then we are able to remove their vacation day and give them that bereavement day. Now, I don't know about you, but not everybody has that kind of funeral, especially, with our Native American population. Those experiences can go on for several days, and there's often not something in the newspaper, and there's probably not a sheet of paper. I actually had one organization that said they required a copy of the death certificate in order to give the individual bereavement. Can you imagine, in order to get that you had to go and do that? So the policy looks really good. We support individuals, but the way we do it is not trauma-informed. So being trauma-informed, kind of the key areas of that SAMHSA talks about is safety. How do we create safety within our organization? And that's physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety. Is it safe to make mistakes? Is it safe to be vulnerable? Trust. How do we develop trust in our organization? And that means I trust that I can tell you something, and that if it's not pertinent, you're not going to go tell other people. I also trust that you're not going to tell me details about Gina that I don't want to know or don't need to know. I trust that if I come to you with a problem, so when somebody comes to you, they have this problem, right? And sometimes they want you to fix it, and sometimes they want you to feel it. So when somebody comes to you with their work problem, the first thing you ask is, do you want me to fix this or feel it? Because if you wanted me to fix the problem and I just sat there and went, oh, that is really hard. Lydia, you've been really brave through all of this. I'm so impressed with your perseverance. Thank you. And you wanted me to actually fix the problem, you're going to leave frustrated. But sometimes you don't want it fixed. You really just want me to know what's happening in your life, what's going on. And I immediately go, well, we should do this, and let's pull them in there and let's start doing this. And you're like, whoa, I don't want this changed right now. I just want you to know how hard it is. So, one of the first things that we can do in that trust relationship is make sure we're having the right conversation. Do you want me to fix this? Do you want me to feel this? Empowerment. How do we lift others up and make sure that they are able to make choices in their own lives, that they have freedom and the creativity to solve issues, and that they're supported if they fall. The fun thing about empowerment is, we think about delegation, right? And so if I delegate a job to Dawn that I've been doing for 10 years, I'm like, hey, Dawn, I want you to start doing this. 9 times out of 10, Dawn is not going to do it perfect. And she's probably not going to do it exactly the way I do it and at the level I do it. But I've been doing it for 10 years. So it's easy to say, oh, no, Dawn, you don't need to do this. I'll just do it because it's easier or faster for me to do it. But the piece of empowerment is recognizing that 10 years ago, I sucked at that too. I wasn't very good at it. And I got to get better and better. And so how do we support others to grow and build in that? Equality, absolutely critical. How do we address it? How do we have those conversations? How do we call people out? How do we take personal responsibility for recognizing when equality isn't happening? And instead of wanting somebody else to fix it, how do we in that very moment do something around equality? Support, making sure that there's opportunities to come together to support one another. That means the fun times too, doing fun activities, enjoying each other. And then the final SAMHSA piece is collaboration. One person can identify a problem, but it usually takes a group to truly solve that. So how do we bring together? I was just talking to somebody who works in the government, and they were describing a meeting that was going to happen. And the work that was going to come out of this meeting was going to get delegated to an individual. And so that individual was invited to the meeting. And then the way the government works, that individual got a message that said, I'm sorry, you actually can't come to this meeting because your title doesn't fall within this level of leadership. So you're not eligible to come to this meeting. We'll just tell you the outcomes later. That's not collaboration. That's not including the people that are going to be doing the work in the decision making. So let's do one more. Let's do one more breakout. I think what is the time? I think we can do this. We'll do one more 5-minute breakout, Gina. Any thoughts or questions before we do that on what we've talked about?
There was a couple of things in the chat. Ted had brought up something about people escaping or avoiding. I don't know, Ted, if you want to unmute, you could explain maybe what you were asking. I don't know if that would be helpful.
He can't. No.
Oh, okay. Okay. And did you want 3 or 4 people in a room? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, let's just go with that same kind of number, and let's have them think about, so those categories, I'll write them again in the chat box, but they were safety, trust, empowerment, equality, support, collaboration. Thinking of those 6 qualities, I want you to think about a leader or an organization and how they really showed up in that area. How, what was something that an organization or a leader did that really highlighted trust or equality or collaboration. So if you want to go ahead and share that, and then we'll come back in and wrap things up.
Okay, sounds good. Everybody should get their message. They're finishing.
So as people are coming back in, if you want to share in the text box any example or want to shout out an example of something that an organization did that was really trauma informed, it might inspire others.
Yep, awesome.
So the flexible work arrangements, yep. Yeah, it'll be really interesting as our workforce goes back into the office as a whole, and how people adjust to that, and if any long-term changes happen. So as people are coming back in, I think we have most everybody back in, but feel free to put in the chat or unmute yourself and share some amazing trauma-informed thing that your supervisor or your organization has done. Just creating that safe environment for staff to be open and honest and being understanding. I love when you're able to have the difficult conversations and not have those elephants that live in your organization. Mm-hmm. How many of us have worked in an organization where you hear the phrase, oh, that's just how he is, or oh, that's just the way it is. And that's draining. So how do we have the difficult conversations? Autonomy and trust, unions, amen, says Nicole. All right, mental health services for staff would be great. Yes. So it's important when we talk about mental health, a lot of the things I tell you, probably 90% of the things are things that you can do yourself or with the support of a friend, but there is always a need for that professional. There's times in our lives where we really do need to get that outside resource. And so all of us at some point in our life should experience going to therapy and having that. All right, so we are just in the last couple minutes. I really just want to thank all of you for coming together and spending these last 90 minutes with us, and Gina for hosting this. I know that some of us are getting a little zoomed out. I hope it helps that you can have the breakout sessions and connect and communicate with others. As we are saying goodbye, I encourage you to, again, pull out that chat box and tell us what was most helpful during these 90 minutes. Is there something that you heard or thought of that was most helpful for you? And we can do that as we're closing.
I would love, the key takeaways. Yeah,
those key takeaways. And Gina's going to have a survey for you. I just want to leave you with the message that each of you are experts in resilience. You know what works for you. You've just got to calm all the stuff in your head so you can remember and you can do it. And you've got to do it for yourself so that you can do it for others. We can't take care of others when we're in that crazy pattern. And as you're working on this journey of helping yourself become trauma-informed and your organization be trauma-informed, remember it is a journey and a process, and you will never be done. You just keep growing and changing. So thanks, everyone. Gina, is there anything you need to say to wrap up?
I just put that link in there. If you guys could, it should be a live link. You should be able to click on it. It's literally less than a 2-minute survey. If you can do that for Tanya and I, that would be super. I will include it in the follow-up email, but it's there for you now if you want to do that and get it over with. And yeah, just show Tanya some love. And I'm going to unmute everybody. We'll all clap and make our best attempt at clapping on Zoom. It never works out great, but here we go. All right. You might have to unmute yourselves, but woo!
You guys.
Thank you, Tanya. You were awesome.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And next week, we have another speaker, which is on the topic of Behavior 101. She's applied behavior analysis board certified person. So join us if you can. And Ted, I wasn't able to write you in the chat, but if you can join next week, we might be able to address that question that you had then. So, all right, everybody, have an awesome day, and thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again
Thanks for what
soon.
you do.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
See ya.